The bedroom door was open, just a crack, enough to see the outline of bodies moving under silk sheets that Regina Blackwood had chosen herself 3 months ago. Egyptian cotton, 1,200 thread count, the kind of luxury that whispered rather than shouted. She stood in the hallway of her own penthouse, briefcase still in hand, heels sinking into carpet that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. The deal had closed 20 minutes ago, $340 million acquisition that would make Crown Global the dominant player in luxury hotel development across 3 continents. She'd been calling Elliot for an hour to share the news. He hadn't answered. Now she knew why. The laugh came first, low, throaty, familiar in a way that made Regina's stomach drop. Lila Bennett, her husband's executive assistant, the woman who'd sat across from Regina at dinner parties, who'd complimented her dress at charity galas, who'd looked her in the eye and smiled while planning this. Regina's hand tightened on the briefcase handle. Leather creaked under her grip. She could have walked away. Should have, maybe. Come back later with lawyers and witnesses and the cold machinery of divorce proceedings. Instead, she pushed the door open. Elliot saw her first. His face went through a cascade of emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, panic, then something worse. Calculation. Like he was already building his defense, his explanation, his spin. Lila turned slower, deliberately, and when she met Regina's eyes, there was no shame. Just a smirk that said what words didn't need to. I won. Regina. Elliot's voice was steady, too steady. This isn't what it looks like, Regina finished. Her voice came out quiet, almost gentle. You're naked in my bed with another woman. What exactly am I misunderstanding? Lila pulled the sheet up, but not quickly. Not like someone caught doing something shameful, like someone comfortable, like someone who'd done this before. How long? Regina asked. That's not important, Elliot said, standing now, reaching for his pants. What's important is that we're both adults and we can handle this maturely. Maturely. He'd been sleeping with his assistant in their bed, possibly for months, and he wanted to discuss maturity. Regina looked at him, really looked, at the man she'd married 8 years ago, the heir to Crown Industries who'd pursued her relentlessly, who'd promised partnership, who'd stood at an altar and vowed forever. The man who'd spent the last 3 years slowly taking credit for her work, undermining her in board meetings, introducing her as my wife instead of my business partner, despite the fact that her strategic acquisitions had doubled their portfolio value. The man who'd just shown her exactly how much respect he had for her. Something crystallized in that moment. Not rage, though that would come. Not heartbreak, though that was there too, sharp and deep. Clarity. Pure, cold clarity. Get out, Regina said. Regina, let's talk about both of you. Get dressed. Get out of my home. Now. Elliot's eyes narrowed. Your home? Last I checked, my name is on the deed too. For now. The words hung in the air like a promise or a threat. Regina turned and walked out, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than slamming it would have. She walked to her home office, the one room in the penthouse that was entirely hers, that Elliot never entered because it's too cluttered with your work stuff. She set her briefcase down carefully, sat in her leather chair, and pulled out her phone. Not to cry, not to call her mother or her best friend or anyone who would tell her she'd be okay. She called her lawyer. Because Regina Blackwood hadn't built a $2 billion personal fortune by being naive. She'd built it by being strategic, patient, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. Elliot Crown thought he'd gotten away with something. He had no idea he just activated the most dangerous opponent of his life. The woman he'd betrayed wasn't a victim. She was a weapon. And she was about to show him exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who's been quietly holding all the power the entire time. If you love stories about strategic revenge, underestimated women, and watching arrogant people get exactly what they deserve, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button because these detailed stories take days to craft and research. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Before the betrayal, Regina Blackwood had been building empires while everyone assumed Elliot Crown was the genius. She was 42, self-made, the daughter of a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs in Cleveland to put Regina through state school. No trust fund, no family connections, just relentless intelligence and a refusal to accept limitations. She'd started in commercial real estate at 24, cold calling property owners, analyzing markets, identifying undervalued assets. By 30, she owned her first hotel. By 35, she had a portfolio worth $200 million. That's when she met Elliot. He was 38 then, heir to Crown Industries, a hospitality empire his grandfather had built, his father had maintained, and Elliot was managing, not growing, not innovating, just maintaining. He was handsome in that old money way, tall, polished, comfortable in expensive suits and exclusive clubs. He pursued Regina with the focused intensity of someone who recognized value when he saw it. "You're extraordinary," he told her on their 3rd date. "I've never met anyone who sees opportunities the way you do." She'd believed he meant it. They married a year later, merged their companies. Crown Global was born, a luxury hotel and resort empire that would span continents. What the business world saw, Elliot Crown, the visionary leader, expanding his family legacy with bold acquisitions. What actually happened? Regina identified the properties, structured the deals, negotiated the terms, and managed the integration. Elliot showed up for press conferences and took credit. At first, she didn't mind. Marriage was partnership. His name opened doors. Her strategy built empires. It worked. Until it didn't. The shift was gradual. Elliot started editing her proposals before presenting them to the board, changing her language, making her ideas sound like his. Started introducing her as my wife, Regina, instead of my partner. Started holding meetings without inviting her, claiming he was streamlining decision-making. At dinner parties, when someone asked about Crown Global's success, Elliot would say, "I saw an opportunity in the Asian market," about a deal Regina had spent 6 months structuring. She'd smile, say nothing, tell herself it didn't matter as long as the empire grew. But it did matter, because respect matters. Recognition matters. Being seen for what you actually contribute matters. Elliot had slowly, systematically erased her from the narrative of their success. And then he'd hired Lila Bennett, 28, beautiful in that generic way Instagram influencers are beautiful. Filtered, posed, performatively perfect. Her resume was thin. Administrative assistant at a boutique PR firm, social media manager for a lifestyle brand. "She'll be great for managing my calendar and public appearances," Elliot had said. "You're too valuable to waste time on that stuff." Regina had met her exactly once before today, a charity gala 3 months ago. Lila had complimented Regina's dress, Valentino, custom, and asked if she could get styling tips, "Since you always look so put together." Regina had been gracious, even gave her the name of her personal shopper. Now she understood. Lila had been measuring her, studying her, figuring out what Elliot's wife looked like so she could become a younger, more compliant version. What neither Elliot nor Lila understood was that Regina wasn't just a wife they could discard. She was the architect, the strategist, the reason Crown Global existed as anything more than a stagnant family business. She'd built this empire, which meant she knew exactly how to dismantle it. And more importantly, she knew where all the bodies were buried. Every shortcut Elliot had taken, every regulation he'd bent, every tax structure that was legal but barely, every partner who had dirt, every investor who had leverage, every deal that would look very different under the right scrutiny. Regina had been protecting him for 8 years. Now she was going to stop. And when you remove the foundation from a building, the whole thing collapses. Elliot Crown was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Elliot Crown had been born believing the world owed him deference. Not because he'd earned it, because his last name was on buildings in 12 countries. His grandfather, the original Elliot Crown, had been the real genius. Post-war industrialist who'd built Crown Industries from a single Chicago hotel into a hospitality empire. His father had been competent enough to maintain it, expand cautiously, keep the machine running. Elliot III had inherited power without earning wisdom. He was 50 now, still handsome, still charming in the shallow way that worked at cocktail parties and investor meetings where no one asked hard questions. He'd learned early that confidence could substitute for competence if you surrounded yourself with the right people. Regina had been the right person. He'd recognize her brilliance immediately, the way she could look at a struggling property and see what it could become, the way she understood market dynamics before they were obvious, the way she could negotiate terms that made everyone feel like they'd won, while Crown Global got exactly what it needed. He'd married her because she was impressive, because having Regina Blackwood on his arm, brilliant, successful, beautiful, made him look better by association. What he hadn't expected was that she'd be more impressive than him, that investors would ask for her opinion, that board members would defer to her analysis, that the business press would start writing profiles that mentioned her name before his. That was unacceptable. So he'd started the slow work of reclaiming his narrative, taking credit, excluding her, diminishing her contributions until the world remembered that this was Crown Global, not Blackwood Global. Lila had been a bonus, an escape, someone who looked at him like he was the most important person in the room because she didn't understand enough about business to know better. She was 28, ambitious in that modern influencer way, wanting fame and luxury without the years of grinding work it usually required. Elliot was her shortcut. He was powerful, wealthy, connected, and he was married, which made the affair feel transgressive and exciting rather than just convenient. They'd started 6 months ago, a late night at the office that turned into drinks, that turned into a hotel room. Lila had been direct about what she wanted. "I'm not looking for love, Elliot. I'm looking for opportunity." He'd liked her honesty, or what he'd mistaken for honesty. Really, she'd just been negotiating. The affair became regular, convenient. Lila was always available, always agreeable, always reinforcing his self-image as the powerful man who deserved whatever he wanted, including his wife's bed. "She's traveling so much for work," he'd told Lila when she'd asked if it was safe. "She won't be home until tomorrow." Except Regina had closed the deal early, taken a red-eye back instead of staying overnight in Singapore like she'd planned, and walked in on something Elliot had gotten too comfortable to hide. Now, standing in the penthouse living room 15 minutes after Regina had walked out, Elliot was doing what he always did when caught, reframing the narrative. "She's overreacting," he told Lila, who was dressed now, looking significantly less confident than she had 10 minutes ago. "This is a marriage. Adults have complications. We'll handle this like civilized people." "She looked pretty angry," Lila said. "She looked hurt. That's different. Hurt people can be managed." He poured himself scotch. "I'll give her a few days to cool down. We'll have a conversation. Maybe some marriage counseling. This is fixable." "What if it's not? Then we get divorced like adults. 50-50 split, generous settlement, everyone moves on." Lila frowned. "Wait, wouldn't she get half of Crown Global?" "Of the marital assets, but Crown Global existed before we married. It's a family company. She gets a payout, not ownership." He smiled. "My lawyers made sure of that." What Elliot didn't know, what his lawyers didn't know, was that while Crown Global had existed before the marriage, it would have collapsed without Regina. And she had documentation for every deal, every acquisition, every strategic decision that had saved or built value. She'd been building her case for years, not because she'd planned for divorce, because Regina Blackwood never went into any situation without an exit strategy. If you caught your partner cheating in your own home with someone you knew, would you confront them immediately or walk away and plan your next move strategically? What Elliot had never bothered to learn about his wife was how she'd actually built her first fortune. Not through luck, not through inheritance, through information. Regina had started her career as a forensic accountant. It was supposed to be temporary, a paying job while she figured out what she really wanted to do. But she discovered she had a gift for seeing patterns others missed, for finding discrepancies in financial statements, for understanding where money really flowed versus where it claimed to flow. She'd worked for a firm that investigated corporate fraud, spent 3 years reading documents that most people found numbingly boring, learning to spot the telltale signs of embezzlement, tax evasion, market manipulation. Then she'd taken those skills into real estate, and she'd learned something crucial. Every successful business person has secrets, not always illegal ones, but shortcuts taken, gray areas exploited, deals that would look different under scrutiny. Smart people manage those vulnerabilities carefully. Stupid people assumed they were invisible. Elliot was stupid. Over 8 years of marriage, Regina had seen everything. The creative accounting that made Crown Global's revenue look more impressive than it was. The shell companies in the Cayman Islands that existed purely for tax purposes. The investor who'd been promised returns that violated SEC regulations. The Miami property that had been acquired through bribes to city officials. She'd said nothing, had even helped clean up some of the messier situations. Because they were married, because protecting him meant protecting their shared empire. But she documented everything, not because she was planning for this moment, because documentation was her reflex. The same way she backed up files in 3 locations and kept copies of every contract. Now, in her home office while Elliot and Lila were presumably leaving, Regina opened the encrypted drive she kept in her private safe. 8 years of evidence, organized chronologically, cross-referenced by category, tax irregularities, regulatory violations, contractual breaches, ethical compromises. Enough to destroy Elliot Crown's reputation completely. Enough to trigger investigations that would tie him up in legal battles for years. Enough to make investors flee. Partners distance themselves. Banks recall loans. Regina had been protecting him from himself. Now she was going to stop protecting him and start weaponizing everything she knew. But she was also smart enough to know that evidence alone wasn't enough. She needed strategy, timing, allies. She pulled out her phone and made the first of many calls. "Catherine, it's Regina. I need to meet with you tomorrow. It's urgent." Catherine Morse, the lawyer who'd represented Regina before the marriage, the one who'd advised her to maintain separate accounts, separate assets, separate legal identity even within the marriage. Regina had taken that advice, which meant that while Elliot thought Crown Global was his family company with Regina as a participant, the reality was much more complicated. The next call went to David Chen, investigator, discreet, expensive, someone who could document things that needed documenting. "I need surveillance on my husband, everything, where he goes, who he meets, what he says, starting immediately." The third call went to someone Elliot would never expect, his own father. Because Regina had something Elliot didn't. She actually understood family dynamics. And she knew that Marcus Crown had never fully trusted his son with the family legacy. "Marcus, it's Regina. We need to talk about Elliot's conduct and what it's putting at risk." By the time Elliot came home that night, humble, apologetic, ready to discuss this like adults, Regina had already built the framework for his destruction. She smiled at him over dinner, listened to his apologies, agreed to marriage counseling, and started executing a plan that would strip him of everything. Systematically, legally, completely. For 3 weeks, Regina played the role of wounded wife considering reconciliation. She agreed to couples therapy, showed up to Dr. Morrison's office in Tribeca twice a week, sat on the tasteful gray couch, and said things like, "I'm trying to rebuild trust, and I need time to process this." Elliot performed remorse, talked about how the affair didn't mean anything, how he'd been dealing with stress poorly, how he wanted to recommit to our partnership. Lila had been fired, of course. That had happened within 24 hours. A severance package, $100,000 and an NDA to make her disappear quietly. Except Regina had reached out to Lila privately, not confrontationally, almost sympathetically. "I know Elliot made you promises," Regina had said over coffee at a neutral location. "I know he made it seem like you were special, like this was real." Lila had been defensive at first, then suspicious. "Why are you talking to me?" "Because I've been married to him for 8 years, and I've learned something. Elliot Crown doesn't see people. He sees assets. You weren't special to him. You were convenient. And the second you became inconvenient, he discarded you. He gave me $100,000. He gave you hush money to protect himself, not you." Regina had slid a business card across the table. "When you're ready to tell the truth about your relationship, about the things he promised, the other women he mentioned, the way he talked about me when you were together, call this number. It's a lawyer who specializes in NDA litigation." She'd left before Lila could respond. Seeds planted, ready to bloom when needed. Meanwhile, Regina was conducting her own investigation into Crown Global's vulnerabilities. The Miami property turned out to be worse than she'd thought. The bribes to city officials were documented in emails Elliot had been sloppy enough to keep. David Chen, her investigator, had copies now. The Cayman shell companies were structured in ways that would trigger IRS investigations if examined. Regina made sure the right forensic accountant, someone she knew from her old firm, got an anonymous tip with just enough detail to spark curiosity. The overpromised investor returns had documentation. Regina started having quiet lunches with board members, asking careful questions about their comfort level with current growth projections. "I'm just concerned we're overextended," she'd say. "Elliot's very optimistic, which I love, but I want to make sure we're on solid footing." Doubt spreads faster than confidence. Within 2 weeks, 3 board members had requested independent audits. And through it all, Regina maintained perfect composure at home. She smiled at Elliot over breakfast, asked about his day, even initiated sex once, because maintaining the illusion of possible reconciliation kept him complacent. He thought he was winning her back. He had no idea she was systematically deconstructing his entire world. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elliot's father. Marcus Crown was 76, officially retired, but still keeping an eye on the family business. He invited Regina to lunch without telling Elliot. "He's making mistakes," Marcus said bluntly over Dover Sole at his club. "Always has. I gave him the company because he's my son, but I'm not blind. You've been the actual leader for years." Regina said nothing. Let him continue. When there's a divorce, I don't want the company destroyed in the process. It's my father's legacy, my legacy, not just Elliot's inheritance." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if you have documentation of Elliot's indiscretions or poor judgment, and if that documentation could be used to protect Crown Global's reputation while ensuring he's removed from leadership, I would support that transition." Regina met his eyes. Saw the calculation there. Marcus Crown wasn't being noble. He was being pragmatic. His son was a liability. Regina was an asset. "I'd need guarantees," she said carefully. "You'd have them, including a significant equity stake, say 40% of Crown Global, and the CEO position. Not his wife, not an employee, an owner, a leader." "I'll need time to think about it," Regina said. But she'd already decided. Elliot wasn't just losing a marriage. He was losing his empire to the woman he'd betrayed. Everything converged on a Tuesday in October. Regina had been planning for 6 weeks, every piece positioned carefully, every vulnerability identified, every ally secured. It started with the Wall Street Journal. an investigative piece about Crown Global's Miami property acquisition, anonymous sources detailing bribes to city officials, documentation of cash payments, emails with Elliott's digital signature authorizing payments that violated the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The article went live at 6 a.m. By 8 a.m., Crown Global stock had dropped 12%. By 10 a.m., the SEC announced it was opening an investigation. Elliott called Regina in a panic. "Did you see the journal piece? Someone leaked. We need damage control." "I'm at the office," Regina said calmly. "There's an emergency board meeting at 2. "Emergency? Who called it?" "Your father." The board meeting was brutal. 12 members sat around the table in Crown Global's headquarters, Manhattan's skyline stretching behind them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus Crown at the head, Regina to his right. Elliott arriving 5 minutes late, flustered, already on the defensive. "We need to discuss the journal article and what it means for company liability," Marcus began. "It's a hit piece," Elliott said immediately. "Competitors trying to damage us. Our lawyers have reviewed the emails referenced in the article." Regina interrupted. Her voice was calm, professional. She slid documents across the table. "These are accurate. Elliott did authorize payments that violate federal law." Elliott's face went red. "Regina, this isn't the time. This is exactly the time, because the SEC investigation starts today. And when federal investigators start looking at Crown Global's structure, they're going to find other issues. The Cayman accounts, the inflated projections we gave to investors, the tax strategies that cross into evasion." Board members were looking at each other. Some knew pieces of this. None knew all of it. "How do you know about—" Elliott started. "Because I built this company's financial structure," Regina said. "I know where every dollar flows. I know every shortcut you've taken. And I've been documenting it for 8 years. You've been spying on me? I've been doing my job, which included protecting you from yourself. I'm done doing that." Marcus cut in. "The board needs to consider whether Elliott's continued leadership is sustainable. Given the legal exposure, the potential criminal charges—" "Criminal charges?" Elliott looked genuinely shocked. "For what? Bribery, tax evasion, securities fraud?" Regina's voice was ice. "Any one of those could mean prison time. All 3? You're looking at a decade minimum. You're insane. I'm not going to prison. We have lawyers. We have lawyers who will advise you to step down from Crown Global immediately to minimize the company's liability, to separate your personal legal issues from the corporate entity." She'd rehearsed this, anticipated every objection. The vote took 20 minutes. 11 board members voted to remove Elliott Crown from his position as CEO, effective immediately. 1 voted no. Elliott himself. "You can't do this," he said, voice shaking. "This is my family's company." "It's a publicly traded company," Marcus corrected, "and you're a liability it can't afford." The second vote took 5 minutes. Regina Blackwood was appointed CEO of Crown Global. 40% equity stake, full operational control, the mandate to rebuild trust with investors and regulators. Elliott stood, walked out without looking at anyone. Regina stayed seated, composed, professional. Inside, she was screaming victory. After the meeting, Marcus pulled her aside. "You had all this ready," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "How long?" "Since the day I walked in on him and Lila." Marcus smiled, a cold, approving expression. "You're more like my father than Elliott ever was. He would have appreciated your thoroughness." "I appreciate your support." "It wasn't support. It was self-preservation. Better you leading than Elliott sinking us all." Regina nodded, understood perfectly. This wasn't personal for Marcus. It was business, which was fine. Because for Regina, it had stopped being personal the moment she turned it into strategy. Was Regina right to document everything during her marriage as insurance? Or was that a betrayal of trust even before the affair? The news cycle was merciless. Within 48 hours, every business publication had run versions of the same story. Crown Global CEO ousted in board coup. Wife takes control. The narrative practically wrote itself. Betrayed wife. Cheating husband. Corporate power struggle. The public ate it up. But Regina had been careful about what information leaked. The affair was mentioned, impossible to avoid, but framed as context, not central motivation. The focus stayed on Elliot's mismanagement, legal exposure, fiduciary irresponsibility. She gave one interview, Bloomberg, sat in Crown Global's executive suite, poised and professional in Armani, and said exactly what needed saying. This decision was about protecting the company my late father-in-law built, about ensuring Crown Global survives the legal challenges ahead. My personal situation with Elliot is private. My professional responsibility to our investors, employees, and partners is public. I take that responsibility seriously. Perfect, reasonable, focused on business rather than revenge. The interviewer pressed, "But you were married to the man you just had removed from leadership." "I married a man I believe shared my values of integrity and responsibility. Recent events prove that belief was misplaced. I'm dealing with that personally. Professionally, I'm doing what's necessary." The clip went viral. "I'm doing what's necessary" became a meme. Think pieces proliferated about women taking power, about corporate accountability, about what happens when smart women stop protecting mediocre men. Regina became an icon overnight. Meanwhile, Elliot was falling apart. The SEC investigation expanded. Federal prosecutors got involved. The bribes were just the beginning. Investigators found tax evasion spanning 3 years, fraudulent statements to investors, violations of banking regulations. His lawyers told him to negotiate a plea deal. He refused. Hired new lawyers, louder ones who promised they could fight this. They couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming, and it kept coming. Lila Bennett resurfaced. Despite the NDA, despite the severance payment, she gave an interview to a gossip site detailing the affair. But more than that, she talked about other women. 3 others Elliot had been involved with during the marriage. "He told me Regina was cold," Lila said, "that she cared more about work than him, made it seem like she'd driven him away. Now I understand. He was always going to cheat. It had nothing to do with her." The NDA was challenged in court, ruled unenforceable because it was intended to cover up illegal activity, sexual harassment of an employee. The $100,000 was returned. Lila kept talking. Elliot's reputation shifted from wronged executive removed by vengeful wife to serial cheater and potential criminal who got what he deserved. His social circle evaporated. The club memberships, the exclusive restaurants, the charity boards, all extended regrets. "Given ongoing legal matters, we feel it's best." His parents stopped taking his calls. Marcus made it clear, "You've embarrassed the family. Don't expect support." His assets were frozen pending legal proceedings. The penthouse, technically marital property, went to Regina in emergency family court because Elliot was considered a flight risk. He moved into a corporate apartment, alone. And then came the civil suits. Investors who'd lost money when Crown Global stock dropped. Employees whose retirement funds had been invested in company stock. Partners who claimed they'd been defrauded. Elliot Crown was being sued from every direction. His lawyers recommended bankruptcy, settling, accepting whatever deal could minimize prison time. At 50 years old, the heir to an empire found himself with nothing. No company, no wife, no reputation, no money beyond whatever he could hide from creditors. And watching from her corner office on the 63rd floor, Regina Blackwood felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even anger anymore. Just the cool, clear calm of a job completed. She dismantled him the way you dismantle a faulty structure. Methodically, completely. And now she was building something better in its place. Regina's first 6 months as CEO of Crown Global were about 2 things: damage control and transformation. The SEC investigation concluded that while Elliot had engaged in illegal conduct, the company itself could avoid criminal charges if it cooperated fully implemented new compliance measures, and made restitution where appropriate. Regina did all three. Hired a new legal team specializing in corporate ethics, brought in forensic accountants to identify every irregular transaction, paid back investors who'd been given fraudulent projections. It cost Crown Global $180 million in settlements and penalties, but it saved the company. The board approved everything she proposed. She'd earned their trust by being the only executive who'd actually understood the scope of problems and had solutions ready. The transformation was deeper than legal compliance. Regina restructured Crown Global's leadership, promoted women and people of color who'd been overlooked, hired executives based on competence rather than connections, established transparency measures that made it harder to hide misconduct. She also shifted the company's strategy. Crown Global had been chasing luxury developments, exclusive resorts, high-end hotels, properties that served the ultra-wealthy. Regina pivoted toward mixed-use developments, luxury hotels with affordable housing components, resorts that employed and benefited local communities, properties that were profitable but also ethical. "We don't just want to make money," she told investors at the annual meeting. "We want to build things that last, that create value beyond shareholder returns, that prove you can be successful without compromising principles." The market loved it. Crown Global stock not only recovered, it grew, hit all-time highs within 9 months. Business schools started teaching case studies about Regina's turnaround, about how she'd taken a company in crisis and transformed it into an industry leader. She was featured on magazine covers, named to Most Powerful Women lists, invited to speak at conferences, and through it all, she remained focused, disciplined, strategic. The personal healing took longer. Therapy helped. Dr. Morrison, the couple's therapist who'd witnessed Elliot's performance of remorse, continued seeing Regina individually. "How does it feel?" Dr. Morrison asked during one session. "Knowing you've dismantled his entire world?" "Like I did what was necessary," Regina said. "He made choices. I responded to consequences. That's not revenge, that's justice." "And the affair? The betrayal?" "Hurt. Still hurts. Probably always will." Regina looked out the window. "But I've learned something. The worst betrayals aren't emotional. They're about respect. Elliot didn't respect me, didn't see me, didn't value what I contributed. The affair was just a symptom of that fundamental disrespect. And now? Now I'm building a company that reflects my values. I'm surrounded by people who respect competence, who see me clearly. That's not healing exactly, but it's something better. It's living well." The divorce finalized on a Tuesday in June. Elliot had fought it for months, tried to claim he deserved half of Crown Global's value, argued that the company wouldn't exist without his family's legacy. Regina's lawyers destroyed that argument with documentation showing that Crown Global's value had grown 340% during the marriage, growth directly attributable to Regina's strategic acquisitions and management. The settlement gave Elliot $45 million, a fraction of what he'd have gotten if he'd negotiated early. But with legal bills, restitution payments, and ongoing civil suits, it barely made a dent in his debts. Regina kept Crown Global, the penthouse, and most importantly, her freedom. She also kept something else, a letter Elliot had written during the divorce proceedings, a desperate, rambling attempt at apology. "I didn't appreciate what I had, didn't see how extraordinary you were. I thought I deserved more than you, when the truth was I never deserved you at all." Regina filed it in her office safe, not because she wanted reminders, because documentation mattered, because evidence was power, because the woman who'd learned to protect herself through information would never stop doing so. And also because on hard days, when she doubted herself, when leadership felt heavy, when old wounds ached, she could read those words and remember. She'd been underestimated once. She'd made sure it would never happen again. Elliot Crown's trial began on a Monday in September. Federal prosecutors had built an overwhelming case. 23 counts including bribery, tax evasion, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. The evidence was damning. Emails, bank records, witness testimony from Lila and 2 other former employees who'd been pressured to participate in illegal activities. His defense strategy was essentially, everyone does this. His lawyers argued that the practices he was being prosecuted for were common in the industry, that he'd been singled out unfairly, that the real motivation was his ex-wife's vendetta. The jury didn't buy it. Guilty on 19 counts, acquitted on 4 where evidence was circumstantial. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd built a career prosecuting white-collar crime, looked at Elliot with something approaching contempt. You were born into privilege that most people can't imagine. You inherited a successful company and a respected name, and you treated it all like a toy you could break because you'd always have another one. You showed no regard for laws, no respect for investors who trusted you, no consideration for employees whose livelihoods depended on your decisions. She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, full restitution to victims, permanent ban from serving as a corporate officer or director. Elliot's face went pale. His lawyers immediately filed appeals, but everyone in the courtroom knew this was over. The man who'd spent 50 years believing he was untouchable had finally met consequences. Lila Bennett's fall was quieter, but equally complete. The media attention that had briefly made her famous, the wronged mistress who'd spoken truth, faded quickly. What remained was a woman in her late 20s with no real career skills, a reputation for sleeping with married men, and a name that Google would always associate with scandal. She tried reinventing herself, moved to Los Angeles, attempted to build an influencer career around empowerment and finding yourself after toxic relationships. It never took off. Her follower count stagnated around 12,000. Brands wouldn't touch her. Too controversial, too risky. She got a job at a PR firm, entry level, $45,000 a year, a fraction of what she'd been making as Elliot's assistant when you counted the gifts, the travel, the access. Regina had heard through industry connections that Lila had tried reaching out, an email through intermediaries asking if there might be opportunities at Crown Global. The answer had been a polite no, not out of spite, out of principle. Lila had proven herself untrustworthy. Why would Regina reward that with opportunity? The last Regina heard, Lila was engaged to a middle management executive at a mid-sized tech company. Ordinary life, ordinary income, ordinary future. The woman who'd thought she was upgrading by seducing a billionaire had ended up with less than she started with. But the most devastating fall was social. Elliot had spent 50 years in exclusive circles, country clubs, charity boards, private investment groups, the kind of networks where wealth and name meant automatic acceptance. All of that evaporated. Not officially, no formal expulsions, just quiet removals. Memberships that lapsed and weren't renewed. Invitations that stopped coming. Events where he was suddenly not on the list. His parents, mortified by the scandal, distanced themselves completely. His sister, who'd always been the responsible one, publicly stated that she did not condone his actions and had severed business ties. The Crown family name would recover. Eventually, Marcus was already working on that. Philanthropic initiatives, strategic partnerships, publicly distancing the company from Elliot's crimes. But Elliot Crown himself? He'd become a cautionary tale. The stupid, arrogant heir who'd thrown away everything because he thought he was above consequences. And the woman he'd betrayed? She became the legend he could never be. 2 years after catching Elliot in her bed, Regina Blackwood stood at a podium in Davos. The World Economic Forum had invited her to speak on a panel about ethical leadership in corporate transformation. She shared the stage with CEOs from Google, Unilever, and Patagonia, Leaders who'd built companies around values, not just profit. Integrity isn't expensive, Regina told the audience. It's clarifying. When you commit to doing things right, paying fair wages, treating employees with respect, being honest with investors, you eliminate 1,000 small decisions about how much you're willing to compromise. That clarity is what allows real growth. She talked about Crown Global's transformation, about tripling revenue while also tripling their social impact investment, about proving that ethics and success weren't opposing forces. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, in the private reception, she was approached by heads of state, Fortune 500 CEOs, billionaire philanthropists. Everyone wanted Regina's time, her insight, her partnership. She was gracious with everyone, took business cards, made genuine connections. But the interaction that meant most came from an unexpected source, a young woman, maybe 26, who approached nervously during a quiet moment. "Ms. Blackwood, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For showing that it's possible. I just finished my MBA. I'm Black, I'm a woman, and I've been told 100 times that I need to be realistic about my ambitions. Then I saw your story, how you didn't just survive betrayal, you used it to build something even more powerful. That changed what I thought was possible for myself." Regina looked at this young woman and saw herself 15 years ago. Brilliant, ambitious, not yet aware of all the ways the world would try to limit her. "What's your name?" "Simone. Simone Chen." "Simone, the world is going to underestimate you, probably a lot. Men will take credit for your ideas. People will assume you're lucky rather than talented. And sometimes people you trust will betray you." Simone nodded, understanding. "When that happens," Regina continued, "don't waste energy being angry. Channel it. Document everything. Build alliances. Position yourself so that when your moment comes, you're ready to take control." She pulled out a business card. "Send me your resume. Crown Global just opened a leadership development program. We're specifically recruiting women who've been told they're too ambitious." Simone's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." But Regina did know, because she remembered being hungry, brilliant, and completely aware that the world wasn't designed for her success. She remembered building herself anyway, and now she had the resources to help others do the same. The personal healing came quieter. Regina dated occasionally, nothing serious. Men were intimidated by her success, her reputation, her sheer presence. She didn't mind. She'd learned something valuable. Being alone was better than being with someone who diminished you. She bought a house in the Hamptons, not the mansion Elliot had always wanted, a smaller, elegant property right on the beach, a place that was entirely hers. She took up painting, not because she was good at it, but because creating something with no strategic purpose felt freeing. She called her mother every Sunday, flew her to New York for holidays, made sure the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give Regina opportunities could now live comfortably, proudly. And sometimes, late at night, Regina would stand on her beach and think about that moment in the bedroom. The door slightly open, the betrayal visible, the choice she'd made to close it softly and walk away. That soft click had been the most powerful decision of her life. Not slamming the door in rage, not screaming or breaking down, just closing it, choosing strategy over emotion, power over victimhood. That choice had changed everything. If you had Regina's resources and position after betrayal, would you have gone as far as she did, or would you have simply divorced and moved on? 5 years after the divorce, Regina returned to the penthouse. Not her penthouse, she'd sold it 3 years ago, but the new owners, a tech couple who'd made billions in cryptocurrency, were throwing a charity gala. They'd invited Regina as the guest of honor, knowing the property's history. She almost declined, but something made her accept. The penthouse looked different. They'd renovated. Modern art instead of the classics Elliot had preferred. open layout instead of formal rooms. Only the view remained the same, Manhattan stretching out like a kingdom beneath them. During the cocktail hour, Regina found herself near the primary bedroom. The door was open now, fully open, welcoming. She stepped inside. Different furniture, different colors. No trace of the space where she'd found Elliot and Lila. But the memory was there, would always be there. "You okay?" The voice came from behind her. Simone Chen, now a rising star at Crown Global, 3 promotions in 4 years. "Fine, just confronting ghosts. Must be strange, being back here." "Actually, it's clarifying." Regina looked around the room one more time. "I spent 8 years in this place trying to build a partnership, trying to be enough. And I was always enough. He was just incapable of seeing it. You could have been destroyed by what happened here." "I could have been. I chose not to be." Regina turned away from the bedroom, back toward the party. That was the only choice that mattered. Later that evening, someone approached Regina at the bar. A woman in her 60s, elegant, with the kind of bearing that came from old money and older confidence. "Ms. Blackwood? I'm Margaret Crown, Elliot's aunt." Regina tensed slightly. She hadn't seen any of Elliot's family since the divorce. "I wanted to tell you something," Margaret continued. "The family, those of us who aren't Marcus or blinded by loyalty, we know you saved Crown Global. We know Elliot would have destroyed it, and we're grateful you had the strength to do what needed doing. I didn't do it for gratitude. I know, you did it because it was right, because you're the leader Elliot never was." Margaret smiled. "My father, the original Elliot, he built that company from nothing, worked himself half to death doing it. If he'd known what his grandson would become, it would have broken his heart. But if he could see what you've made of it now, he'd be proud." Regina felt something crack open in her chest. Not vindication, something deeper, legacy. She'd taken something broken and built it into something better. She'd taken betrayal and transformed it into power. She'd been underestimated, dismissed, betrayed, and she'd used all of it to become extraordinary. That was the real revenge. Not Elliot's destruction, Regina's ascension. And 5 years later, standing in the place where it had all begun, Regina Blackwood finally felt peace. Here's what Regina's story teaches us about betrayal, power, and the long game of justice. Being betrayed doesn't define you. How you respond does. Regina could have screamed, confronted, collapsed. Could have made it about emotion, about rage, about proving she was hurt. Instead, she made it about strategy, about documentation, about building a case so airtight that when she was ready to act, nothing could stop her. That's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is reactive, lashing out, getting even, hurting someone because they hurt you. Justice is strategic, dismantling systems, exposing truth, ensuring consequences match actions. Regina didn't destroy Elliot out of spite. She removed him because he was a liability to the company, to investors, to employees whose livelihoods depended on competent leadership. The fact that removing him also vindicated her? That was a side benefit. The lesson isn't get revenge on people who wrong you. It's build yourself so completely that people who underestimate you face natural consequences when they inevitably fail. Elliot fell because he was incompetent, unethical, and arrogant. Regina just stopped protecting him from himself. Lila fell because she built her life on shortcuts and other people's resources. When those resources disappeared, so did her trajectory. Regina rose because she'd always been extraordinary. The betrayal didn't make her powerful. It removed the person who'd been taking credit for her power. That's what happens when strong people finally stop letting weak people use them. 5 years later, Elliot Crown was a footnote, a cautionary tale about privilege without competence. Lila was anonymous, and Regina was a legend, not because she destroyed them, because she built something so significant that their betrayal became irrelevant to her story. That's the real power. Not revenge, not even justice. Just living so well, so successfully, so completely on your own terms that the people who hurt you become background noise to your triumph. Elliot asked if Regina could forgive him. She did something better. She forgot him and built an empire on the ashes of what he tried to take from her. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in strategic justice, in building yourself unbreakably, in refusing to be defined by betrayal, smash that subscribe button. Drop a comment about a time you turned pain into power. Hit that like button if you think Regina handled this perfectly. See you in the next story. Until then, remember, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so extraordinary that your betrayer's entire existence becomes irrelevant to your success.